This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. We hope you'll join us each Sunday as we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We'll have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference in this country. We'll talk about politics so we can discuss social commentary, and we'll explore social commentary so we can discuss principles and the people in America who actually live them every day. We'll bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we'll send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, we begin this week with an international view from Russia. The past 7 days have been most extraordinary as the Wagner Group took control of a key military city and began a march toward Moscow, getting within 124 miles and then inexplicably halting and turning back and their leader leaving for Belarus. What does all this mean for Russia and the once seemingly invincible Vladimir Putin? Well, we're thrilled to have as our first guest on the show, in studio with us today, someone who knows his way around Russia, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Jon Huntsman Jr. And Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Sunday Edition. We're glad to have you here today. Explain for our viewers what has really taken place inside of Russia and what it means for Vladimir Putin's grip on power.
Well, first of all, Boyd, I'm honored to be with you. Congratulations on the new show. We're going to miss Doug a little.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're so glad that you're in the seat, so thank you for it. You know, nation states and leaders aren't built to last forever. And the Russian state has been around for 1,000 years in different permutations. The region has been embroiled in a lot of security issues, even during the modern era that we're all familiar with. Yeah. You know, the Tsarist period, Bolsheviks, communism, so on and so forth. Putin has been in power for 23 years.
Right.
He's the longest serving head of state in the world. He knows all the tricks in the book, and when you sit down and meet with him, you get a sense that he's got a bag of tricks for everything. He's well studied. He knows the issues. He knows what he wants. He's a ruthless dictator.
Yeah.
He's cold as ice. And he's had his eyes long-term on Ukraine. He's attempted to destabilize it post-2014. He's tried to destabilize nations around him, like Georgia, like Moldova, where he's in Transnistria. So why does he do this? He does this because he believes in rebuilding the Russian Empire. He wants a buffer zone, like they had during the Warsaw Pact years. So when he went into Georgia, the world did nothing in 2008. When he went into Moldova, the world did nothing. When he went into Crimea a few years later, the world did nothing. And then into eastern Ukraine, the same. So for him, the signals were all, okay, this is my territory and I can do what I want. Fortunately, his strategy was not to be. His team is largely incompetent, and Zelensky has shown muscle and the courage to fight with the Ukrainian people, which is terrific. Now, who would have thought this of Zelensky, because he was a comedian who would never run for office. And I was with Russian leadership in the Kremlin when he was elected, and they were laughing. And I thought, well, he's a comedian, but he speaks Russian. so maybe we can connect at on that level. So here we sit 16 months later, 200,000 deaths. Russia's military armor has been almost depleted. His tank fleet, his attack helicopter fleet. He still has a lot of air assets, but this last incident with Yevgeny Prigozhin is a window into the dysfunction of his very tight national security team, which the world rarely sees.
And I want to get into that. You wrote a piece with some of your colleagues talking about the piercing of that armor for Vladimir Putin. And we always say it's kind of an interesting thing. It's not so much how many people storm the castle or storm the Kremlin in this case. It's who actually shows up to defend it. And the silence of the Russian people seems to be a little deafening. So what are we actually learning in this?
Well, you've got silence on both sides. So Yevgeny Prigozhin took his troops. They were stationed in Rostov. He effectively took over the military base, which is right in the center of town. So Rostov to Moscow was like from here to Fillmore or from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. And he met no opposition. The people in Rostov southern part of Russia.
Yeah.
We're cheering him on.
Yeah.
And he's become kind of a populist figure since he rose in about 2014 and created the Wagner Group, which is an irregular warfare kind of band of thugs.
Yeah.
And they do Twitter farms, and they play in Central Africa, as they do Libya and Syria,
as
just
well,
to name a few.
Yeah.
And they go in and they train and they share intelligence and they sell arms, and they also do business deals. So why did Prigozhin hang around? Why was he saved and not hit with a missile as he was advancing? Well, A, he's an insider, and Putin, I think, is making the calculation that's better to have him in the tent than out.
Yeah.
He knows too much, and he's of economic value to them because with all the sanctions against Russia, Prigozhin has a line out to certain countries where they have deals, and the deals are quite lucrative. So there's a lot going on in the Putin-Prigozhin relationship that is not right there at face value.
Yeah.
But he led the charge. Putin decided to get Lukashenko, the dictator in Belarus, who effectively is a subsidiary of Moscow, and has been since they negotiated a security guarantee after the last round of elections in Belarus. And for reasons that we don't need to get into, Prigozhin was stopped. Who knows what the deal consisted of, but passage to safety for he and some of his people. Maybe a higher cut in some of the deals they're doing in Central Africa. And here we sit. Meanwhile, there's been radio silence around the Putin people. So you really don't have a lot of vocal opposition. There are reasons why. But one would think that you would begin to see the fraying within the system in Moscow. We still might see that, and I suspect we're going to see purges that will play out. Not the Stalin-esque purges, because 70 years ago, Stalin would have rounded up 10,000 people and put a bullet to the head. This is a different era. But I think we also find that Putin, and by extension Russia, is in a cul-de-sac. There's not an easy way out. And they have a failed economy. They have a failed relationship with the people of Russia who have endured this for 23 years without any privileges, without any ability to fight back, speak out, and organize. And he, as a leader, has shown that the Teflon is worn off.
So interesting. I want to close out by something you and I have talked about before, and that is what Vladimir Putin actually fears. Because it doesn't seem to be sanctions or even military challenges, but it's a lot of the things that we'll all be celebrating this week in the 4th of July. Talk to us a little bit about what it is that really scares Vladimir Putin.
He fears liberty. He fears his people. So, you know, you've got a ruthless dictator when they fear their own people at the end of the day. He fears humiliation, which he just had delivered to him big time. So between humiliation, which now he'll have to carry, which delegitimizes him as a leader, and remember, he has to declare his candidacy for re-election by November of this year. The elections will be March of 24. So the period between now and November is going to be really interesting because it now kind of turns to politics. And I was in Russia during the 2018 elections. And I saw Putin politic. The embassy reported widely on that round of elections, as embassies do. And he's a kind of a master politician. He's a glad-hander.
He knows the deal.
He knows how to give stuff away. And so we're entering a period now. So you got war in Ukraine, and now he's got war within his own government and probably among his own people.
Ambassador Huntsman, we really appreciate you joining us today, as always, and I look forward to having you back.
Real pleasure.
All right. Up next, the power of religion in a divisive political climate. A unique perspective straight ahead in my conversation with Jonathan Rauch, Senior Fellow in the Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution, why an atheist thinks religion is crucial to democracy. We'll be right back. As we prepare for the 4th of July this week, we turn our attention to many of the first freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. In a divisive political climate, some have sought to push faith and faith-based organizations out of the public square. Our next guest has a unique perspective that democracy and religion have a powerful interconnectedness that is important for believers and non-believers alike. Jonathan Rauch is a senior fellow in the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution. He's the author of 8 books and countless articles on public policy, culture, and government. Jonathan joins us today from our nation's capital. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here, Boyd. Thank you.
There's been an increasing and a very loud call, not just for separation of church and state, but for faith to be kept to closets and churches and synagogues and mosques. You have a very different perspective. Share that with us.
Well, my perspective actually is that the big issue we're increasingly seeing is not secular desires to cabin faith and remove it from the public square, but increasingly strident voices from the religious world saying that it's embattled, that there's a war on Christmas. We're seeing election denial, which is really finding its way into a lot of evangelical circles. So I'm starting to wonder the opposite, which is religion, Christianity in America still as committed to constitutional values as it used to be. So it's kind of pulling in both directions.
Yeah, and as you look at that, you've talked on many occasions about, one, your perspective as an atheist, but as someone who says we do need to have religion and religious institutions in a democracy. Tell us about that combination and how we keep those two in the right lane and the right space in order for the right conversations to take place.
Well, it goes back to the founders, Boyd. All of them, Matheson, Hamilton, Washington, Franklin, they all pointed out that the Constitution is not self-enforcing, that a liberal democracy like ours is based on a set of rules, but that the morals underlying those rules have to come from outside liberal democracy itself. It has to come from what they called Republican virtue. That's things like truthfulness and lawfulness and being a good citizen, civic engagement. And those things, they believed, came from, among other sources, religion. And it turns out they were right. In the last 20 to 30 years, we have seen an unprecedented disengagement from religion in the American public. Now, I'm an atheist, and I once thought, that's great. We'll be like Scandinavia. We'll just be, less divided by religious topics and less superstitious. But that's not how it works out. It turns out that when people lose faith and begin to wander off, they substitute other things for religion, things like QAnon, extreme wokeness, radical movements of all sorts, and even, stuff like fad diets and Soul Cycle. And it turns out, to get finally to your point, that those things really can't do the job of forming the values, the foundations that our democracy needs. So now we're looking at a world where we've got to think, people like me, secular liberals, even atheists, need to think about how can we shore up some of these religious foundations and work toward better alignment with our religious friends.
Yeah. Religion is obviously very deeply baked into Utah's history and much of the country as well. And oftentimes our religious beliefs impact the way we vote and what we choose to support. What do you think is the best way to balance those two? You've often talked about it in the framework of not deifying our politics or politicizing our religion. How do we actually do that?
Well, a person that I turn to for wisdom on this is a gentleman by the name of Dallin Oaks. Some of your viewers may have heard of him. He is, I think, first counselor to the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but he's also a former Utah State Supreme Court justice and BYU president and a distinguished constitutional lawyer. And he's given a couple speeches, especially one that everyone should read from the University of Virginia a couple of years ago. And he says that what we need to do, in particular what religion should do, and in particular the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is take an approach of what he calls patience, moderation, and compromise. Instead of taking a fearful posture to society, war on Christmas, Christians being driven out of the public square, desperate times require desperate measures. No. He's arguing that Christians should be more Christ-like in their approach to politics and work with the other side and tone it down instead of up. And I think that's exactly the right message, and that the kind of compromise that the church has been involved with between gay rights and religious liberty I think that's a big step forward and maybe a model for the rest of us. And I say that as a longtime gay rights advocate and a gay American myself.
Yeah. And Jonathan, finally, just in the last 60 seconds here, we often do see that it's easy when you're on social media and you have that contempt for another person that you think they're not just wrong, but wrong or evil, or that there's something fatally flawed in them. Makes it easier for us to melt down their Twitter feed or blow up their Facebook page and still sleep well at night and go to church on Sunday and feel good about ourselves. Give us just in the last 60 seconds something that we should be thinking about doing different in terms of how we see each other and how we interact.
Well, you know, here again, I'm going to maybe sound like an advertisement for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I was very struck by what President Nelson had to say at the General Convention this spring, which is basically before you press that send button, or at least before I press that send button on social media, I try to imagine that I'm talking to the person, and I try to model my best self. And that's sometimes hard to do. But, you know, if we wait for 10 seconds or a minute or 10 minutes before posting, that's a lot easier to do.
Jonathan Rauch from the Brookings Institution, thank you for your work, for your brilliant insight and writing. More Sunday Edition coming up next. As you approach your Independence Day celebration with barbecue, fireworks, and summer fun, it's important to remember that the things we ignore or forget, our children may never know. And what our children don't know, our grandchildren may never possess. Freedom is fragile, especially when those principles of freedom are forgotten. The Declaration of Independence that we celebrate on July 4th is a defining document that sparked the pursuit of liberty and fanned the flame of freedom in America. The document itself is primarily a detailed list of all the grievances the colonists had against King George and the British Crown. Yet it is amazing to me that in the midst of the litany of complaints, that the phrase, all men are created equal, makes a stunning and transcendent appearance. That declaration within the Declaration launched a national, soul-conflicting conversation that continues today. It isn't a question of the sincerity of the statement or the verity of the values. Rather, the question is how to bring our individual and national behavior into alignment with the ideals we profess to believe. Now, there are some opportunists in power who want us to look at all of our differences as a reason for division and divisiveness, rather than seeing our diversity as a divinely delivered strength to our democracy. You see, the cynics are attempting to undermine the very founding principles of America. They make the case that the founding fathers who declared these ideals were flawed and not living congruently or aligned with what they declared in our nation's founding documents. But that's like condemning out-of-shape people for working out at the gym or sinners showing up and attending religious services. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught that the better angels of our nature and a divine discontent inherently spur us to bring our professed beliefs and our daily walk into alignment. The history of nations pursues a very similar path. As King described it, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. You see, justice itself is an alignment or a balance of the demands of justice and human mercy. On Thursday, the Supreme Court upended affirmative action in college admission procedures. The headlines have been heated, but the reality is that the law was doomed to collapse under its own structure. The law was dependent on rigid classifications that couldn't account for multiracial families and an increasingly pluralistic society. Now, Abraham Lincoln rightly declared that the purpose of government institutions was to clear the path of laudable pursuit for all, to give all an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life. So this requires a broader look than just the color of a person's skin, but we have to take in all the factors that make up the content of character. Now, I've long been a fan of Jackie Robinson. As long as I can remember. He was a reformer and a barrier breaker when he became the first African American to play Major League Baseball in 1947. And yes, Robinson endured taunts, slurs, and abuses of every kind. Yet he kept his belief not only in his professional pursuit, but in a vision of the kind of equality that could unite the nation. Such unity could bring the behavior of individuals and society into alignment with the idea that all are created equal. Robinson taught powerful lessons and shared nation-defining principles, saying, Whatever obstacles I found made me fight all the harder. But it would have been impossible for me to fight at all, except that I was sustained by the personal and deep-rooted belief that my fight had a chance. It had a chance because it took place in a free society. Not once was I forced to face and fight an immovable object. Not once was the situation so cast iron rigid that I had no chance at all. Free minds and human hearts were at work all around me, he continued, so there was this probability of improvement. And then Robinson concluded, I can say to my children, there's a chance for you. No guarantee, but a chance. The great promise of liberty-loving land and a free people is that everyone and every cause has a fair chance, a fighting chance to change, to overcome, to endure, and ultimately to succeed. So aligning our principles and our behavior in America is a perpetual struggle, and individually we must make it our struggle. Our halting and often stumbling steps as a nation toward equality and justice for all must continue. And in that process, we must make sure that our differences do not drive deeper division, but that our differences expand our view of the dignity and divinity within our fellow travelers. By transforming division into a focus on the transcendence of human dignity and divinity, we live up to the idea that all are created equal. And we can begin to be on our way to actually forming that more perfect union. Those are principles worth remembering and revisiting, especially as we go through this 4th of July week. Well, thanks for watching Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson, and as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.